morning. My name is Carl GLO. With great pleasure and pride that I present my longtime friend, and I hope you will join me in welcoming Kim. And we just love you and respect you, Kim, and we're so glad you took time to be with us today. Thank you.
Carl, I feel like I'm home. This is my fourth time to speak to this group. It's my first time virtually. I miss the good food, I miss your fun music, and I miss every one of your friends. An interesting and eclectic and intelligent and stimulating group of people. And I just want to thank you for joining us. This is my opportunity to update you with valid information that is authentic, that you can check out, and that I think you need to know as members of the business community in Harris County. Part of what I've always enjoyed about Carl is I didn't have to convince him that there was a link between his business and accounting in general and the keeping of track of commerce and everything that CPAs and that the firm does and what we do. We try to control and prevent crime. Public safety is the job of all law enforcement. The district attorney is the top law enforcement official in the county. I've been practicing 33 years. It was a quick 33, but I will tell you this is a job not for novices. This is a job that requires the ability to make decisions based on evidence. And let me assure you that, especially in a political season, there's plenty of pressure. Pressure from the left, we're going to protest you for this. Pressure from the right, we're going to protest you from that. My opponent is with the police union, ever critical these days of prosecutors across the country. And so our world is full of dissension. But as I talked to Carl this morning and we kind of caught up, hey, how are you? How's the family doing? I, honest to goodness, feel like our community's been blessed. Let me explain. As you look around the country following George Floyd, and really before it, we've been sinking, I think, into more and more dissension, and it's showing up in violence on our streets and in our homes. Hence, there's an uptick in domestic violence. How does that affect you in business? A lot. It can be one of your employees. This is a crime that has absolutely no economic or socio a uniqueness about it. It could keep them from coming to work. If it happens that somebody wants to be violent at the workplace because of a domestic violence situation, that can affect you. And during the time of COVID, with everybody completely stressed, I just suggest to you that it's always important to have a plan and measures in place to prevent any kind of workplace safety. And now with our workplace in our home, think about that. You've got two risks, known risks, the risk of domestic violence, even in your own home, yes, and you've got the risk of workplace violence if somebody's mad at you who worked for you or who's mad at one of their employees because they're in a domestic situation. So our paths cross quite a bit, the business community and the criminal justice community. And why does this make us blessed in Houston? Because Houston is a town, I believe, that understands risk and rewards. I think Houston is a town for realists. Optimists, yep, it's a boom and bust town. Always has been, but we've been steady over the last several decades as our country had economic problems. I think we've been blessed to have a more robust economy, there's a word, a more robust economy than many big urban areas. And while I don't believe that economics is the sole driver of crime, look what a pandemic can do. It can cause crime in our own homes and a spike in domestic and workplace violence. It's something that Houstonians are good at flexing. I think we know how to roll with the punches. So why are we blessed? Well, as we saw other cities immediately following the George Floyd killing, we saw other cities devolve into protests that turned violent. Ours here, we had 51 people. I won't call them protesters. They were criminals at a protest who got arrested for either intentionally harming somebody or something, or looting, or being in possession of dangerous weapons. And for the most part, everyone else was peaceful, including the 800 or so protesters that were arrested in a combined effort by the Houston Police Department, many members of other law enforcement agencies, and the district attorney's office. And while we are few, we had a team out, a special response team with police command, to see what was happening on the ground. So the folks who did get arrested at the end went peacefully. They were making a statement. They simply would not clear the street after given direct orders by police in front of DAs to clear the street. And yes, there were people who tried to block the freeway like they did in other cities, and our police held the line and the protesters did not turn violent. Why is this unique? I don't think it was an accident. I think we're blessed to have leaders here, even on different sides of the aisle, who don't believe in violence as the answer, who think it's bad for business and bad, I think, for our soul as a community. So I feel blessed to have worked with the police chief and the other law enforcement agencies, the sheriff, the constables, and members of our DA's office who worked for 5 days straight while protests happened here. But you did not see vehicles burned. You did not see violence against one another, most importantly. So I think we're blessed. Now I want to run through a quick update of what's happening in our office. While we're blessed, we got plenty of problems, folks. And so how does it affect the business community? Criminal justice and law enforcement is about 60% of your city county budget combined. Our mission is to make our community safer through evidence-based prosecution and equal justice for all. This means guaranteeing a fair process to obtain a just result for the victim, the accused, and the community in every case. In short, our system has to be fair in order for us to be safer. And I think that public safety is part of the reform formula that cannot be left out. So I believe these things, reform and public safety, can coexist. And I think that's exactly what the protests in Houston proved. We're only 759 permanent employees. We do have interns from different schools, law schools and undergraduate schools, a few, around the city, and we have become a major employer of the local law schools, all of them. We have 348 assistant district attorneys. As you all know, I will always tell our community the truth. We are way understaffed, and we have numbers of cases that are simply going to require more people in order to move through a backlog. But there's a plan. I am not weak on crime, and I do not set bail. There is a lot of misinformation out there about the DA's office, and it does a disservice to our lawyers who are fighting to actually keep dangerous people behind bars daily. We argue based on evidence when somebody presents what we consider too great a threat and risk to our community safety to let out of jail on a PR bond or an insufficient bond. And so we ask for reasonable bail. So when I tell you I'm not weak on crime and bail is a judicial function, there is a message out there. It's pumped through the community purposefully, and it's political. And its mantra is that the DAs are letting people out. We are not. Now, this does not mean that every decision we make about every case is something people are going to agree on. In fact, they're going to disagree on every single one. This does not mean we're being unfair. It means we are trying to be lawyers handling cases from beginning to end. Right now, we are facing a pretty dramatic backlog. We have 44,000 cases pending in 22 district courts. Almost all of the judges are less than 8 years on the bench. And so we have junior judges. We have a courthouse that has not been repaired since Harvey. And we have a very low number of prosecuting attorneys. And we have police forces that make arrests, and we take the charges when probable cause exists to believe that a crime has occurred. So we are going to continue to take cases to reduce this backlog. Cases will have to be pushed through the system, and trials are central to the system. And here's where we get to the real scary part for businesses. Whether it's a civil dispute, a family dispute, a probate dispute, or a criminal law violation, juries are at the center of our justice system. Everything is dependent upon the interaction of people in our democracy. So when you get a jury summons, business community, that affects you. We can't raise enough people through jury service, people that are confident that they will be safe and that their service is relevant, then we can't keep our justice system up. So juries are at the heart of it, and ensuring that we make places safe and that we make service meaningful is important, honest to goodness, to living in a free country. So to get these numbers down, I think we're going to have a commitment from the business community to ensure that jurors will appear. Why does that affect you? They're your employees. And while you have to give people the day off for jury service, sometimes people get caught up in trials. Now you'll hear me pushing technology as another way to reduce this backlog. I believe in it. I agree with Judge Rosenthal over on the federal side that says we should be doing many of our hearings through Zoom or any other platform. The sheriff has made the jail ready for that. I'm totally behind that because it's a safe way to conduct the business of the courts. But when it comes to juries, both grand juries and trial juries, that requires people's presence. There are safe ways to do it. Right now, NRG has been converted into an area where 4 juries can be selected at one time. We'll see how it works. We're going to trial for the first time next week. Why does this matter to the business community? You can't resolve your disputes. If your people can't resolve their disputes in court, folks resort to self-help. You know, in business, that's ugly. So one bad turn can sometimes justify another in certain people's, I think, decision-making process. I think it's imperative that people believe we have a justice system that works. So one that's delayed by giant backlogs, 2,000 cases in a court, and no jury trials happening right now, that's a problem for the business community. That's a loss of income. That's a loss of revenue. I think that's a loss of, I think when law firms have to reset cases on the civil side, clients bleed money. That's you. On the criminal side, defendants languish in jail or worse. They're out on insufficient bonds on the street, and they often commit additional crimes, some of them violent. I'm tired of wringing our hands and saying, what do we do about it? You have to participate in your system, business community. And that means knowing your judiciary. It also means knowing your DA. If you have a question about what I did on a case, you can call me. In fact, I'd rather you call me than the media. That's what many people do. And it inevitably seems weaponized politically. I'll say this like I've told you all along. I represent all of you. Crooks never ask what party you vote with. And as the DA, I don't ask what party the crooks voted with. We try and treat them equally under the law. Let's look at misdemeanor courts. Same thing. 39,000 cases. These are more than double what it was in 2017, and I think it's a direct result of Harvey, the courthouse issue, COVID, and we have, to a large extent, new judges. These jobs do require, there's a learning curve. I can speak from experience, just like any other CEO in this audience or manager of a law firm or a business. Time is money. Your people only have so much time. And this workforce, in terms of COVID, is facing major challenges at home. That affects your bottom line. And remember, when home is more dangerous than it used to be, because we're all spending a lot of time during tense periods, financially, emotionally, etc., I think it's hard on people. One word to that. These misdemeanors, people might say, well, they're just misdemeanors. These are DWIs. These are domestic violence cases. These are burglaries of motor vehicles, the most common and prevalent crime in the state and in the city. These are numbers to me that we can not only do better, we must do better for our economy and commerce to continue to thrive. Remember, if the criminal courts look like this, your civil courts are likely to as well. What are we doing during COVID to help not just make the business community whole, but whole communities? We are collecting restitution from criminals. Why is that important? Because that's one of the only ways we can make certain victims whole in a sense. Obviously, in murder cases, we cannot make a victim's family whole. In the police shootings that we're seeing, regardless of whether the shootings were justified or not, those families aren't going to be made whole. But when it comes to theft, when it comes to mischief, when it comes to assault and medical records, we can try. And this is, Carl, what I want to talk to you about after, but I'd really like to talk to you about it now. When we, during my entire career as a lawyer, we've seen problems with collection and distribution of money by government entities on the criminal side when it comes to restitution. It seemed like there was a scandal every 10 years, whether the probation department or the DA's office needed it or not. So when I got to the office and hired a first assistant with an audit background, Vivian King, I set her to the task of fixing restitution. First thing she did was find out that about $2 million had cheated to the state already. The accounts had been embezzled. In fact, we were defrauded as well. Got the money back, but that's the state, that was the financial state, just that we found the restitution accounts in when I took over. Vivian has worked with our staff and done an excellent job of not just working with police and getting them to collect better contact information from victims, but getting enough people on board that we can literally call crime victims, even the property crime victims, within a week of the crime. When it's violent criminals, we're able to contact them within the first 48 hours if we have good contact information. Why is this critical? You have to know, as business community and as individual victims, that without good contact information, we can't make you whole. We may not even be able to prosecute your offender. But with information, something as simple as that during the time of COVID, we've been able to collect a total of about $29 million in restitution. And of that, we've been able to distribute about, I think it's about 18 million. That may not be on here, but that's my recollection. About 3 million of the 2.3 million, I'm sorry, I can't see. About 2.3 million has come through something called CEP funds. These are environmental pollution cases, illegal dumping, things that plague ordinary neighborhoods and commercial areas, things that cause businesses, I think, problems. So we've been able to, through enhanced and increased prosecution of those types of offenders with our constable's office, especially Alan Rosen's office, with our contacts at the pollution control, and even with federal contacts in EPA, we've been able to bring some major suits, collect 2.3 million in environmental restitution, and distribute it back to organizations serving those communities. So we try to fix where the harm came from. These are some things that we're doing. These are some things that we are doing at the DA's office during COVID that I want the business community to know about, because we're on two sides of the ledger now. You spend a lot on law enforcement, on your courts, on your district attorney, on your public defender, on probation, on prisons, and parole. Like I said, in total, roughly, it's about 60% of every tax dollar. So I want you to know, when it comes to our office, working remotely with about 70% of our employees, now returning to about 50-50, but staggered work, we've still been working to make the individual victims and the business community whole when they're victims. Now, Carl, what about your case? And I hope I haven't violated a trust here, but many people are victims of different types of fraud and theft. I know it's happened in my family. Lots of lawyers have their firms embezzled. It happens to professionals. We trust people. It happens. What happens when you've got a deadbeat probationer? You collected the evidence. You got it to the police. The police worked with the DA. We got charges filed. We bring them. Person is convicted. It's probation or deferred adjudication, and it's paying restitution, and then turns into a deadbeat. We've got a new plan to try and push through the courts a challenge to these individuals who say, I can't make any money, I'm not making any money, it's all COVID. My thought is there's a duty on them at some point to prove it. And so we're asking for hearings in those types of cases. We can't do it every time, and not every judge will go with us, but you know what? Courtrooms are open, and we invite you, if you're a victim or if you're a supporter in the business community, to join us for an open session of court. It's important that you know that your courts are working virtually as well as physically. Why? Because we have to be involved in our democracy. So I've gone on quite long enough. I appreciate everybody's attention. What can the business community do? Help us strengthen our workforce. There are too many people who are honest to goodness, willing to work, but have old cases on their records where maybe they were dismissed, maybe they served out a probation lawfully, paid people back. We want to clean up their records. What about people who have tickets that have piled up on them in JP court? Yeah, they shouldn't be driving with, a bad car that has defects. But when those tickets pile up, at some point, courts need to work with these folks to get these tickets paid off. And they do, but we have to get the folks into court. So by offering some forgiveness on some types of cases, we can get more people to get their records clear. Clearing those dockets helps our community. One, you get a little revenue in, but crimes should never be revenue-based. What they need to be is deterrent and helpful to getting people to do things in a lawful way, drive, act, behave, etc. So this gives people a chance to make it right. And finally, the third prong, cleaning up people's records, trying to get them a little warrant forgiveness in some of the JP courts for some types of crimes, and finally, second chance employers. It's not a perfect proposition, but we're asking the business community to partner with us and try and help make our workforce stronger by giving people with criminal histories a chance, an opportunity at a job. At least let them apply and check it out. It's an imperfect science. I can tell you there's problems in the workforce. Ask any employer. It's tough these days. Employees are scared. They're they're difficult. This new generation of employees is expectant and almost entitled at times. It's interesting times in the workplace and in the workforce, but I think that we shoot ourselves in the foot by convicting too many people and never taking it off their record. And what I'm talking about are nonviolent misdemeanors and served out probations. And I would go as far as to say we should expand this to certain felony drug cases. Like tickets, they ought to fall off your record at some point. Call me crazy, but I just think that we have to give people hope and at some point a fresh start. And if they screw up again, then you can hold your DA responsible. If we don't at least give them a fair process, meaning if they mess up again, we investigate, we prosecute, and we punish. So I'm clear on our role. It's public safety done in a fair way. And I hope the business community is clear that our worlds intersect and we need each other. I'm here to serve you. I'll answer any questions that you've got. Marijuana diversion was my first program. Conservatively estimating, it has saved about $28 million a year. But more importantly, it's kept cops on the street. So what I did is I worked with the 87 police chiefs that I serve. Our office reviews, files, and prosecutes the cases of 87 different law enforcement agencies, and we worked with every single one of them to reach an agreement, stop prosecuting marijuana offenders, and instead send them to a class. There were exceptions, cases on in school zones, drug-free zones, cases at penal institutions, of course. But for the most part, it was a non-prosecution for misdemeanor amounts of marijuana. Yep, it was still illegal. It was still probable cause for police to stop and search for other things or ask somebody questions about their driving or other crimes, but it no longer was a standalone crime, and it immediately saved us 10% of our docket. Out of 100,000 cases, that was 10,000. That program has been a big success. But interestingly, the state, each DA in different areas did different things. Some kept prosecuting marijuana, but none to the extent that Harris County had, 10,000 people a year. I mean, that's a small town every year that was being convicted of misdemeanor marijuana possession. That knocked people out of the workforce, out of housing, out of education. To me, that cut our nose off to spite our face. And I think there were a lot of common sense folks in this crowd that agreed with it. And if you didn't, I'm good with that too. We got it done through law enforcement, through agreement. And it was tough negotiating, but we did it by agreement. The result has been we don't process those people any longer. And interestingly, the state, when the legislature met during the last session, they didn't fund their labs and they legalized hemp. And so they made prosecution of marijuana a virtual impossibility because we couldn't prove the disparate THC levels between hemp and marijuana. I know I'm in the weeds, but the bottom line is many prosecutors around the state deferred prosecution, did other things with it, basically did what we did from the beginning here in Harris County. And I think it'll be hard to get that horse back in the barn. Got marijuana legal in a number of states for different reasons. It's a money-making industry. You already see CBD and the impact here. So I think we're going to continue down that line of non-prosecution, trying to reach other solutions for those types of law violations. And I think there'll be questions in the future about gambling, about prostitution. I just think what we're seeing is a change in our society about what they want to spend their criminal justice dollars on. I'm really not advocating for or against any of it. What I'm telling you is I'll follow the law, but when it comes to using your tax dollars intelligently, we better be common sense. And we can't afford 28 million bucks a year spent on labs, defense lawyers, probation department, prosecutors, police. on misdemeanor marijuana. We need them on burglary, rape, robbery, theft, murder. Well, I really think that combining certain areas between law enforcement, traditional first line responders, and lawyers at the DA's office, like in financial crimes, would make the most sense. I've talked with HPD Chief Art Acevedo about a financial hub. I've talked about it with Sheriff Ed Gonzalez. I think that's something you can anticipate in our future. That would let us be a force multiplier for one another in these financial cases. We've got to get on them faster. Although, interestingly, in fraud and theft cases, it's difficult to ever recover the money at the time. You have to get it back in restitution. And even when we send people to the penitentiary for that type of crime, I think it's important that we create lasting judgments that can be enforced civilly. It's another area where I think we can try to make crime victims more whole through simple common sense policies and good legal strategy. I think you'll see more in the area of human trafficking. It's just too important right now, and we have areas in our city where it's just too commonplace. It's really hurting business on the Bisnet Strip and other places, FM 1960. I think that there's going to have to be some resolution to that. But what we're doing is trying to work up the chain of criminality. I'm not interested so much in the sellers. I'm more interested in deterring buyers and very interested in prosecuting the people who traffic, pimp, and exploit young women and men, and especially children, for that purpose. And then finally, police and public corruption. We have to hold people equally accountable under the law. That requires investigation. Police are not known for investigating themselves. Public officials aren't always known for investigating themselves. This falls to the U.S. Attorney's Office and the District Attorney's Office. And so right now we work with the FBI and with other law enforcement agencies, and then we handle some investigations internally through grand jury process for those type of investigations. And I think you'll see more of that because the public demands it. I'm against it. I think we can't afford to defund police, and I'm not sure that I agree with Houston Chronicle about redefining it. I will suggest that there's waste everywhere in government. I'm certain, including my department, I can tell you I'm on the lookout for it with our finance team constantly, trying to make sure that we're using our money most appropriately. One short plug, we're reinvesting drug forfeiture money in the very communities that were damaged by the prominent use and sale of those drugs in those communities, like Fifth Ward. And we're trying new ways of ending that school to prison pipeline in minority and poor communities. This is important to our workforce, our economy, and the soul of our country. And I think we have to try, and I think that's where the business community can also be involved. You know, kids generally don't start out with capital murders. It starts small, and if we can correct it early and sometimes find its source, you know, in an area that we can help correct, I think that's important. So community-based organizations working with young people, I'm all about that. So I know I got off track with your question, but I wanted to make a shameless plug for reinvesting that. So when it gets back to defunding the police, our police right now, just like the DA's office, are understaffed. So while my opponent is a police union staff attorney, and while the police are at times critical of our office, I will continue to say we work every day with them. And in a democracy, we are a check and balance in the system. We're not supposed to agree all the time. Same with the courts. We can be critical of judges, but there's a natural tension because our judicial system is adversarial. It's a contest. This, isn't a Europe. We left that system. This isn't the Mexican government where you try everything on paper. Our system is you duke it out, but you don't do it on the streets. You do it in court. So I'm against defunding the police because we need, I think, all the public safety protection we can get. But I am for us all being very, very, very fiscally responsible. Well, I've outlined a number of things. One, I want you all to have a workplace and a domestic home place safety plan. I want your employees to know what to do, whether something bad happens in their home while they're working in place there or at your workplace. And our domestic violence division can help you do that. We can do it in more than one language. I think this is something that the business community would profit from. Planning is always helpful. Then it's up to you all to train. Secondly, I think you can ensure that your employees know that jury service is critical. It's a civic duty, but more important, it affects your bottom line. Third, you've got to report crime. If it happens to you, I've seen in many instances businesses want to move on. Forget about the embezzler. Well, I'll tell you, people will steal until we stop them. And while the system is not always satisfactory, and Carl, you may not get all your restitution back, we're going to darn sure try. I think we have a continuing duty to crime victims to try. And in court, all that means is filing motions. But when there's 2,000 pending cases in a court, it's hard to do that. So we got to have more staff. And I think that the business community can advocate that it's important to commerce and the engines of our economy that we have a justice system in Harris County that works. That means a courthouse that's livable and usable. That means enough people to handle these cases on a reasonable schedule. And the increased use of technology so that we can do it safely. I think that's what the business community can do. And finally, I'll make a shameless pitch in my official capacity that there's an election coming up and that my job performance is on the ballot. And so I hope I've answered your questions. I've tried to be a dutiful and faithful public servant because it is an honor and a privilege to serve this community. And Carl, I love you and Linda and the kids and all of your friends and family as well. Thank you all very, very much.
Kim, before we leave, I'd like to ask, first off, I'm incredulous about the Second Chance program. I'm trying to absorb all that and make sure that that's a prayer and a hope that so many people have had for so long. This is incredible. And, being heavily involved in the Third Ward and many different charities, as you know, they just need to have a second chance. And I agree with you. If they blow the second chance, that's another deal. But I'm trying to believe, do I believe my ears right? I mean, what is the process for obtaining a second chance? How does that work?
So we offer 2 events per year called Make It Right. Because of COVID, this will not be a physical event. Last one was at the George Brown. We had over 1,500 people show up. We offer free review of a criminal record to expunge or non-disclose cases that people had. Because my prosecutors cannot by law do this, we work with the Beacon Law Firm, part of the Episcopal Diocese, and a volunteer legal group out of the Houston Bar.
Right.
They bring the cases, we review them, and courts grant those motions, and people get that old criminal case knocked off their record, therefore making them more employable. The second chance part of the program are employers that right now are saying, go ahead and apply, and will consider your application. That's all they do. We don't make anybody, guarantee us a quota, but these are businesses whose CEOs have agreed to allow us to advertise that they'll accept applications from people with criminal histories. I think that's a lot.
Well, it's huge. And we've been involved with Work Faith Connection, and they help former offenders, find employment. But this is so huge, and trying to give people the financial resources to provide for their family and their children and do the things they need to do. And, sometimes, Kim, when people are young and foolish, as I know, they just don't know the consequences of what it is that they're doing. They get in a slippery slope, and before you know it, there they are with a criminal record, and they just were unaware about the long-term consequences. I just applaud you for your creativity, your courage, your boldness, for the development of programs just like this, and also the diversion program that we heard about last year. We need that brain stimulation applied to common sense in a common sense way to our government, and you're certainly a great example of making that happen. I know the battles you have to fight to get it done, but hallelujah, and God bless you and all the efforts that you're doing. We're very lucky to have you as our district attorney, Kim. Thank you.
Carl, it is my honor to be with GLO and with every person who took time out of their day to join me. Please feel free to contact my office. I'm going to get on the chat before I leave and just put my contact information